What's the power of a visit? Pun intended. Good morning to you. Good Thursday morning. Dejan Kovacevic of DK Pittsburgh Sports. And this is Daily Shot of Steelers. It comes your way bright and early every weekday. If you're into hockey and or baseball, I also offer daily shots of Penguins and Pirates in the same place that you found this. Visits, like absolutely everything else about the NFL draft in 2024, are going to be over-magnified, over-analyzed, and by the time the actual process is complete, just totally forgotten. So how much do they really weigh into who gets picked? Probably not too much. At this stage of everything, the Steelers, just talking about them and the way they do things, have gotten to know pretty much everyone they'd want to get to know out of this class. They've gone to pro days. They've talked to countless coaches and people inside football, which, by the way, don't have to be registered as visits. And above and beyond everything else, they have watched film. So when you look at Jackson Powers Johnson, the consensus, though not unanimous, top center prospect in the draft, and then you add in that Powers Johnson is the only center who's visited the Steelers to date, and then as the foundation under all of that, you repeat to yourself that this is the position of greatest need on either side of the football for the Steelers. It's super easy and probably at least a little bit fun to project that he's going to be the guy. However, there isn't much to substantiate that. While acknowledging that the Steelers aren't exactly in the business of following other people's mock drafts, and that the Steelers and all 31 other teams have access to infinitely more information than anybody doing any mock anywhere, Powers Johnson hasn't exactly blown anybody away in this calendar year. He's had injury problems. He even got hurt at the scouting combine. A hamstring that knocked him out on the second day. At Oregon, he's had a bunch of injuries, groin, hip issues, and maybe the one that would be the greatest concern, several concussions over his collegiate career. That's tough because if you know anything about concussions, they don't really go away. They just continue adding up. You don't erase them. They can heal, but they're on your ledger, and you can keep adding to them, and things get only worse. In part because of this, dude hasn't played much football. 2023 was his first full season as a starter. It was his first season ever at center. He had 4 career starts at the position. He had 2 at right guard, 1 at left guard, 1 at defensive tackle, of all things. So do you really know how good of a center he is? I guess so. I mean, because the scouts and everybody else were raving about him as recently as 2-3 months ago, saying this guy is unequivocally the head of the class for that position. And a lot of mocks had him in the first round. Go check those now. You won't see them. You'll see him now in the 30s and the 40s. You won't see him in the first round. And, based on that, and obviously, again, not suggesting that mocks are more important than what the Steelers are putting together, because there's no way that they can be. I'm getting a little bit edgy about this first round center thing. I really am. It feels like if you were to get that player at that position, meaning number 20, that you'd be reaching. You'd be stretching to fill out a void that, you yourself created by cutting Mason Cole almost immediately into the free agency period. Like, they'd made up their minds. They were done with Cole. And they gave him, out of respect, a chance to get out onto the market early and ideally find a new home, which, by the way, he has not done yet. Remains out there. But you would think that within that, there's a real solid intent to get a center somewhere. And since it hasn't happened with any other player in free agency yet, and there isn't much left, it's almost got to be out of the draft. This is why you heard the Steelers say for years and years and years that they don't like to go into the draft having their backs against the wall at any position. Well, they do. I think they do not just at center, but also at wide receiver with the trade of Deontay Johnson. I think you could make an argument that they have their backs against the wall at a couple defensive positions, but I'd probably get some pretty solid counters to those arguments. Center and wide receiver? Nope. Everybody would agree. So if it's not Powers Johnson, then who is it? Duke has an interior lineman, Graham Barton, who's he's listed as a center. He's being ranked as a center. He's got a first-round grade from some outlets, some experts, and there are even those who have him as the number one center now on the board. Those people, by the way, I'm sure not coincidentally, dropped Jackson Powers Johnson. They're among the many to do so. Mel Kiper, who's not the world's greatest at this anymore, but is without a doubt the most well-known, has the Steelers at number 20 mocked up to take Barton as the center. Now, Barton hasn't visited. Does it matter? Who knows? J1Q is next. This segment of Daily Shot is brought to you by our good friends at Mike's Beer Bar. They're located on Federal Street, directly across from PNC Park. Mike has more than 500 beers on tap, including from more than 50 local breweries. Stop in and say hello. Tell Mike we sent you. Mike's Beer Bar. Today's J1Q comes from John, who says, DK, would the Steelers consider moving Darnell Washington to right tackle? Worked with Larry Brown in the 1970s. He started as a tight end, caught a touchdown pass in Super Bowl IX, then became a starter at right tackle for several years, even making the Pro Bowl once. I don't need to tell you, John, that the tight end position has changed an awful lot over the past 50 years. And what Brown did was a more normal move back then than it would have been now, principally because you had your pass-catching tight ends. And again, to Brown's credit, you mentioned he was capable of doing that. And the Steelers of the 70s ended up getting Benny Cunningham, Randy Grossman, other guys who could just basically run routes in addition to blocking. The modern tight end, which is obviously exemplified now by Travis Kelce, before him, Rob Gronkowski, are guys who just have massive builds and can do anything athletically. And when I go back through the Steelers' history, even just in my mind, the player who jumps out as a comparable for Darnell Washington is Eric Green. Green was monstrous, but Green could do anything. I'm going to keep using that term because that's what it would look like. You'd see somebody that size and you'd think it was unfair that he could also play a skill position in football, but he could, and he could do it really well. He could do it better than Washington, for that matter. Guy could catch and run too. I am not in favor of such a move. More relevant to your question, I've never heard the tiniest inkling of such a move. I look at Darnell, and even though he's not this, I look at him as the biggest guy in the locker room. You'd have to be around him to know what I mean when I say that. He just seems unfairly, obscenely huge. And then when you couple that with watching him on the football field, in my case, especially at the practices where you're really close and you're right at that level, what he's doing almost doesn't line up with your belief system, like your eyes and your brain aren't in sync. And he got better as the season went along in practices. You saw some of that in games, to his credit. He'd get like one catch. I think he ended up with 7, just going off the top of my head. He'd get like one catch a game and you wouldn't bat an eyelash over it. You wouldn't be like, whoa, they threw to Darnell. It just kind of happened. Okay. But to move him from tight end to right tackle, what you would be doing principally, I believe, is removing a skill. And I very seldom see the purpose in such a thing. You would be taking a player who's capable of representing a significant surprise component to your offense and telling him, don't bother with that. Don't bother with a lifetime of having built that up, regardless of how we could utilize that, because we have a need over here at this position. If I'm Arthur Smith, I'd like to have as many different question marks lining up across the line of scrimmage. And by that, I mean question marks that the defensive coordinator has to answer. I don't want him to know where everybody's going to be and what everybody's going to do on my line of scrimmage when I break the huddle. And if I get big number 8-0 on one side of the football and you think he's over there to double team somebody or to chip somebody or whatever it is, and instead he just goes out for some middle route and you pick up a first down as a result of that, that's a lot more valuable than addressing a short-term need, which, by the way, can be addressed through other means. So that's my answer. We'll see what theirs is, but I'll repeat for you here. I just never, ever, ever heard anybody discussing any such thing on South Water Street. I appreciate the question. I appreciate everybody listening to Daily Shot of Steelers, and we're going to do another one of these tomorrow.